I'm a truck driver, and I've been delivering goods throughout the countryside for over 15 years. I've seen a lot of strange things on the road, but nothing compares to what happened one night at a farm where I stopped by chance. I was driving a long route, delivering supplies to a few small farms, and after hours behind the wheel, I noticed something was wrong with the truck. It felt like one of the tires was flat, so I decided to stop at the next farm I came across to see if I could get some help. It was a large farm with miles of cornfields stretching as far as the eye could see. When I parked the truck near the main house, it was already getting dark. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered. I thought it was odd, but figured the owner might be out in the fields still working. I decided to wait a bit, hoping they would show up. While I was sitting in the truck's cab, I heard a noise coming from the cornfield. It sounded like something moving through the stalks, but the noise was strange, like heavy footsteps dragging on the ground. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was just the wind or maybe an animal. After all, this was the countryside, right? But the sound grew louder, closer. When I looked again, I saw the corn leaves swaying, as if something was really moving between them. Something big. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck to take a look, still convinced it was just an animal. I pointed the light towards the cornfields and started walking slowly, trying not to make too much noise. That's when I saw it. In the middle of the field, between the tall corn stalks, I saw a silhouette. It was a large creature, bigger than any animal I'd ever seen around there. And the way it moved wasn't natural. It staggered with broad shoulders and a low-hanging head. But when it saw me, it stopped. I stood there, frozen, with my flashlight pointed at that thing. I couldn't make out many details, but I knew it wasn't human. It was too far away for me to identify clearly, but I was sure it wasn't a normal animal either. The shape of its body was all wrong, as if it were deformed in some way. The air around me felt heavy, like time had stopped. Fear hit me suddenly, and before I knew it, I was running back to the truck. I locked the doors and sat there, sweating cold, listening to the sound of the corn rustling. That thing was still out there, moving through the cornfields. The minutes dragged on, and the noise didn't stop. I started hearing more, like the creature was circling the truck, moving through the rows of corn, watching. Every now and then, I caught a glimpse of it in the mirrors, a massive shadow moving slowly. My heart was racing. I wanted to get out of there, but the truck wasn't in any condition to drive, and the last thing I wanted to do was step outside again. When I finally mustered up the courage to start the engine, I heard a sound I will never forget. It was a scream or a type of roar, something so deep and horrifying that it chilled me to the bone. The creature was close, and I could feel the vibration of the sound all around me, as if the air itself had come alive. I started the engine, no matter what condition the truck was in, and with it sputtering and shaking, I began to drive away. I didn't care anymore about the flat tire or the damage it would cause. I just wanted to get as far from that farm as possible. As I pulled away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time and saw the creature standing in the middle of the cornfield, watching as I drove off. I made it to a small town the next morning with the truck in terrible shape. I had to explain what happened to the local repair shop, but I never mentioned what I saw. They thought I was odd, of course, for driving with a flat tire all the way there, but I'd rather they think I was crazy than tell them about what I had seen. Since then, I avoid stopping at farms at night. And honestly, I never went back to that route again. I don't know what that thing was, but just remembering it sends chills down my spine. I've been a farmer for as long as I can remember. I was born and raised here, working the land, tending to the wheat fields. After my wife passed away a few years ago, I've been alone on the farm, but I never thought of leaving. This land has history, tradition, and it's the only place I truly call home. At least it was until one night that changed everything. It was an ordinary night, like any other. The sky was clear, and the full moon lit up the fields. I used to take one last walk around the farm before going to bed, just to make sure everything was in order. It was already past 11 when I went out with my flashlight. The wind was calm, and the silence of the countryside always gave me a sense of peace. But that night, there was something different in the air. As I walked along the edges of the wheat field, I noticed a faint light coming from within the field. It was a strange light, orange, as if something was burning in the distance, but there was no smell of smoke. My heart started to race a little, but I decided to investigate. Maybe it was a bonfire lit by hunters or some careless neighbor. I couldn't risk a fire. The light grew stronger as I got closer. When I reached the center of the field, what I saw left me paralyzed. There was a perfect circle in the middle of the field, as if the wheat had been burned or torn away in an area about 6 meters in diameter. In the center of this circle, the soil was black, charred, and there were markings on the ground that looked like symbols. Something I'd never seen before, like ancient writing or drawings that didn't make sense. That orange light was glowing from the ground, almost as if the soil itself was glowing, but there was no fire. As I got closer, I felt an intense heat, and for a moment, I thought I heard whispers. I stood there, unable to move, just staring at those marks and trying to make sense of what could have caused it. But the more I looked, the more a sense of wrongness settled over me. Then, without warning, I felt a sharp pain in my right hand, as if something had cut me. I looked at my palm, and there was a small but deep cut, and it pulsed with a strange energy. Blood dripped slowly, and the cut seemed to glow, as if it was connected to that circle of fire on the ground. I didn't know what to think. There was nothing there that could have hurt me, but the cut was real, and that sensation of heat kept growing. I decided I had seen enough and started to back away, but before I could fully retreat, the orange light grew even brighter. It was as if the circle was alive, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, but I could swear the earth seemed to shift slightly, like something underneath was trying to emerge. That's when the whispers returned, but this time they were louder, clearer. It was as if many voices were speaking at once, in a language I couldn't understand. I ran back to the house as fast as I could. I didn't look back, not even once. I locked every door and window, still feeling the pain in my hand. That strange heat seemed to have spread throughout my body, and I was trembling, unsure if it was from fear or something affecting me from the inside. The next day, I returned to the field, determined to figure out what had happened. But the circle was gone. There were no burn marks, no symbols. Everything was normal, as if nothing had ever happened, except for the cut on my hand. It was still there, now scarred, but leaving a mark that never disappeared. Since that night, something changed on the farm. Sometimes I still hear whispers in the wind, and at night, I have strange dreams about symbols and lights. I don't know what I saw in that field or what caused that circle of fire, but ever since, I've never felt at peace here again. The land feels different, like it's waiting for something. I haven't told anyone about it. Who would believe me? An old farmer talking about mysterious lights and symbols in the middle of the field? But the mark on my hand is real, and every time I look at it, I remember that heat, those whispers, and the feeling that, in that field, I wasn't alone. My name is Daniel. I'm a nature photographer, and I've always been fascinated by capturing images of isolated places. About a year ago, I found a remote farm that seemed perfect for a project I was working on. The farm was surrounded by endless cornfields, and it had a simple house that the owners rented to me for a few days. The place seemed ideal. Stunning landscapes, absolute silence, and at nightfall, the starry sky I was so eager to photograph. On the second day, after spending the afternoon taking photos around the farm, I decided to explore a little farther. The farm owner had mentioned that the fields extended far, but he didn't seem to mind if I wandered around. I grabbed my camera, a bottle of water, and a flashlight, and I ventured into the rows of corn that stretched for miles. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange. After walking for nearly an hour, I came across something that piqued my curiosity. Hidden among the corn, in the middle of nowhere, was an old, worn-down cabin. It was covered in vines and almost completely concealed by the plants. I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been walking so close. It looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. Being the curious type, I decided to approach and take a closer look. The cabin was small, made of old wood, with broken windows. When I stepped inside, the smell of mold hit me, and the floor creaked with every step. There were no furnishings, just a few old chairs scattered in the corners and a dusty table in the center. But what really caught my attention were the walls. They were covered in strange symbols, all carved into the wood. Some resembled distorted human figures. Others were symbols I didn't recognize, like an ancient language or drawings that made no sense. At that moment, a chill ran down my spine, but my curiosity kept me from leaving. I began wondering who might have lived there and why someone would carve those symbols into the walls. I took out my camera and snapped a few photos. As I did this, I started to notice that the air inside the cabin was getting heavy, as if there wasn't enough oxygen. My heart began to race, but there was no apparent reason for it. That's when I heard a noise behind me. I quickly turned, shining my flashlight, and saw that the corn plants outside were swaying, as if something or someone was moving through them. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound was different, stronger. It felt like something large was moving, coming toward me. My instincts screamed for me to leave, but at the same time, something urged me to stay. It was a mix of fear and curiosity. I quickly exited the cabin and started walking back the way I came, but the sound persisted. With every step, I felt the presence of something behind me, something that seemed to be following me closely but never revealing itself. The rows of corn around me were moving, and at one point, I had the impression of seeing a figure running through the plants, always just out of sight. I quickened my pace, and the sound grew more intense. Twilight was turning into darkness, and I knew if I stayed out there too long, I'd end up lost in the middle of the field. The worst part was that the farm seemed to be getting farther away. I had walked a long way and should have been close, but the rows of corn seemed endless. I started sweating, glancing over my shoulder with every step. I never saw anything clearly, but the sensation of being watched, of being followed, grew stronger by the minute. Finally, after what felt like hours, I spotted the farmhouse in the distance. I ran as fast as I could, and when I arrived, I locked the door behind me, still out of breath. I waited for a few minutes, peering out the window, but the field was quiet again. Nothing was moving. The plants were still, as if nothing had happened. I grabbed my camera and reviewed the photos I had taken of the cabin. That's when the real shock hit me. In the photos of the walls, besides the strange symbols, there was something I hadn't noticed at the time. In one of the photos, in the corner of the wall, I saw a figure. It wasn't a reflection or a smudge. It was a human figure standing, looking directly at me. A dark silhouette with a face I couldn't make out, but it seemed to be watching me as I took the pictures. The problem is, when I took that photo, I was alone in the cabin. Or at least, that's what I thought. After that night, I decided to leave the farm early. I didn't tell the owner about the cabin, and I never returned to that place. To this day, I don't know what that figure in the photos was or what had been following me through the fields. But one thing I know for sure, whatever it was, it wasn't human.